Welcome to Coleman Report Live. I'm Bob Coleman, and we're talking Main Street and the small business lenders and secondary market brokers who help it grow. Bob Judge, founder, CEO, Government Loan Solutions. Bob, you've been doing this for 13 years now, 2007. Is your business model going to take?
No, we're pretty much, everything that goes to the secondary market, we have a product for, so help you sell it, help you account for it, help you value it. So that's and data around that kind of stuff. So it's a solution that's worked for us and a formula that's worked for us. We're going to stick with it.
Good for you. Well, congratulations. Hey, I know you have to run, so we're going to change it up a little bit, and we're going to talk about SBA 7A Market. What's going on with that, Bob?
Well, the market has performed magnificently over the last, 4 months or so. Obviously, the SBA paying principal and interest has pushed prepayment speeds down into the 5% range. The Fed, with the TAL 2.0 financing SBA pools, has helped find investors for the product. So the market has rallied significantly. In fact, the 25-year now is over 120, which doesn't happen too often, and history has only happened a couple of times in the last 20 years. So that is quite a benchmark to hit, and it looks like it. Who knows? It might continue moving higher from there. But the market is extraordinarily high. Great time for lenders to sell loans in the secondary market. Great, the investors are getting cheap financing from the Fed, and prepayments are low. So everything is,
Well, I was going to ask.
Though,
is this a demand issue by the investor, a supply by the lenders producing a lot of volume, or a combination of both?
Yeah, I would say, well, the volume is, starting to pick up. Obviously, the PPP kind of put things on hold for a while, but we do see volumes picking up. Also, again, people seeing where the market is are finding loans to sell. So, I mean, definitely the supply is up, demand is very high. So it's it's a good time to be in the secondary market.
Bob, what is this full boat pricing, the 275? What is let's go for the 25-year terms. What is the average spread that lenders are receiving on those longer amortized loans?
I would say, probably the average is probably more like prime plus 2.25. Obviously it ranges everything from, 1.5, 1.25 up to 2 3/4. We use the 2 3/4 as a benchmark just for consistency. But I would say the average is probably somewhere in the prime plus 2.25 range.
And what type of price can we get for a prime 2.25 piece of paper?
In the long end, that's probably going to be about 2 points down. So figure 118. Yep, give or take.
Very favorable. Very good.
For prime plus 2.25, you get about 118.
Okay. All right. I always ask you this question, and you always tap dance. So let's do it. I'm the CFO, and I'm budgeting for 2021. What should I budget for my average premium?
Well, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, right now it's a lot of the reasons why the market is so high is more about the federal government and their intervention in the industry with paying P&I and the Fed doing the TAL program. If those things end at the end of the year, I would suspect the market will back up from the 120 level. So if someone has a loan to sell, I would do it before these programs sunset. So I would think that the market will back off next year, assuming those programs aren't extended.
Well, I know 120 tends to be the ceiling that SBA is comfortable with. They get very uncomfortable, as well as Congress, when it goes over 120. Back to the day when you had 80% guaranteed, you sell them for more than 20. You have absolutely no skin in the game, so they're concerned about that. Do you hear any rumblings about that, or do you think there will just be a normal market correction?
I think it'll just be a normal market correction. Right now, it's again, the reasons why it's so high are not fundamental. It's just the impact of the stimulus program. So I think SBA realizes once those programs are gone, the market will naturally move back towards equilibrium, which is probably in the 115, 114 range. So I suspect you'll see something, down 4 or 5% from here.
So if you're saying 115, 114 range for 2 3/4, then we're talking 111, 112, maybe 113 for two and a quarter paper?
Yeah, well, I would say in 25 year, you probably, the most recent average is somewhere in that 114, 115 range. You probably will back up somewhere close to those kind of numbers. But you will definitely back off 120 once these programs end, because you should see prepayments start to rise again, because the P&I is being paid. Also, the investors won't be as active because the Fed is not there to provide them with cheap financing.
Bob, let's talk about 504 market. How, I know you don't put together these numbers, but you do track it. How do these numbers look on a historical basis through the first half of 2020?
Well, again, just like the 7A, prepays are down quite a bit in 504. Again, that helps, obviously, the market. The P&I is also being paid on 504 borrowers as well. So, same story. Market is very strong, again, with rates low. So, again, it's a good time. If you're a seller of 504, it's also a good time. There's a lot of demand for that as well. So, again, it's good times for 504, and, a lot of the same reasons that, the 7A market is strong.
Now, I'm looking at these rates, and Libor, I thought Libor was going away. Are we still basing pricing on that, or is that going to go away?
People will start to, move away from Libor. I mean, Libor's still got a couple more years to run, and also there's still a little bit of uncertainty around that. But, you'll start to see people slowly move away from Libor as a benchmark.
Bob, you mentioned prepay. I know we have some people on the call who are confused by that. When we see prepayment on 7A as well as 504, what are the two components of a prepayment of a loan?
Well, the two components are defaults and the voluntary payoffs by borrowers. So, defaults typically the last couple of years have been pretty low, and voluntary payoffs have been higher. It's going to flip this time, because I'm sure we'll see defaults rise once the SBA stops paying P&I, and voluntaries should, stay pretty low because, again, the economy is not strong. Banks are not as aggressive with conventional lending, so much like we saw during the credit crisis in 08 to 2010. So, the big question is how bad defaults will get once, we turn off the spigot. So that's the big question.
Right. Very good. Now, in your modeling, you mentioned that the payments from SBA are going to be stopping September, October. In your modeling, how much of an increase in defaults do you see? Are you guessing, or tell me what you're doing with that factor?
Well, it's right now. It's just, we never had this kind of situation happen before, right. So no one can really look to the past. I mean, before the pandemic, you had about a 2% default rate, during the credit crisis, it got up to 8 to 10. So that would be kind of the target, for this time around to start. So maybe it gets worse, maybe it doesn't. Depends how things go. But I would say that's probably your, if you look at history, that's what happened. On the voluntary side, right before the crisis, before the pandemic, we're talking about 14% per year. During the credit crisis, it was down to 2%. So we'll probably see, again, a similar number for voluntaries heading down to that 2% per year level. So I would say that, the credit crisis in 08 to 2011 or so was probably your where you're going to start modeling and then go from there.
All right, last question, then I want to talk about our event in November. Tell me, when do you think the market is going to peak? Is this the peak, or is this going to be spill over into early 2021?
Well, I think that, I think it's going to be, well, from a secondary market perspective, I suspect the peak will be the end of this year. Again, once things start to
I love when you tapped in, Bob. I love it. You're No, but the
secondary market's going to peak this year, and then prepayments should start rising again next year, which again will have a puts pressure on the secondary market. But right now, I would say that you're probably a pretty decent secondary market for, through the rest of this year. But after that, we'll see.
All right. Well, Bob, I appreciate you giving. I mean, you're the expert in this stuff, and your guess is, I would say, pretty sound. You're certainly better at prognostication than myself or anybody else in the industry. So we appreciate your honest feedback on that. But I think you've given a good solid background of where we are today. Hey, I want to talk on November 11th, Bob. You and I got together back in 2008. We said we need to have some sort of secondary market summit. We had the first one in New York in end of August. I don't know who picked that. In a non-air conditioned room during UN week. We've come a long way since 2008, Bob.
We have at that, yes. Unfortunately, at this stage of the game, we don't know when we're going to have a live one, which is obviously a lot more useful, a lot better for everybody. But I guess we'll have a sort of a shortened version in November or November as an option.
But I remember we met for the Secondary Market Summit, and for those of you who could care about history, that's when the secondary market completely, there was no secondary market. Banks canceled repos. I believe it was, Lehman Brothers had just filed bankruptcy, and it was, and I think there was a lot of alcohol flowing, as I recall.
Well, there's always that.
So what we're going to do, it's going to be November 11th. We're going to go about 90 minutes. Bob is going to do his prognostication a little bit more in depth for 2021. We've invited our friends from SBA who they've been very gracious in the past to join us in Washington, D.C. Obviously, Washington, D.C., we're not even going to try to do it this year. And when things loosen up, maybe we can talk about mid-year 2021, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. So it'll be a 90-minute webinar type format. We'll have a bunch of guests. We'll talk about 7A Market. We'll talk 504. We will be presenting our Hall of Fame award winner. And it won't be as good as being in person, but it'll still be a great event because it is solely secondary market oriented. See, Bob, when I pause.
It should be worth attending.
Yeah, see, when I pause, that allows you to jump in and be. Hey, Bob, I appreciate you taking your time out of how's New York City these days? You're a stealth reporter in New York.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's getting better. You see more people on the street. The restaurants seem to be doing reasonably well with the outdoor seating. Of course, now that the weather is, on the verge of turning, we'll see how it goes with, when it gets colder. Obviously, we see some people starting to put heaters out, but it remains to be seen how restaurants will perform, under colder conditions.
Right.
And of course, that's a big driving force for a lot, a lot of the economy here. Gyms are open, with limited ability to do stuff with masks, all that kind of thing, and museums are opening, but slowly, step at a time.
All right, very good. Hey, Bob, thank you very much for joining us. Say hi to the gang for me.
I will. Thanks for inviting me.
Katie, you had a lot to say about that. Katie, welcome out of Washington State. Katie, tomorrow is going to be talking about productivity, working at home, and what we're doing. And so what we thought we would do is we would update our stats to give the C-suite an idea of when we're managing remote workers, because I know, Katie, when I went to school, I never took a class called managing remote workers, and I never took a class called working at home. So 59%, is that pretty much in line with what you are writing about?
It really depends on the industry. Oops, we've got a lot of sound in the background here. It depends on the industry. I haven't really heard anything specifically about lending so far, so that's why I was interested in asking that question.
I'm glad to see 60%.
I have heard several people say that they were more productive, though, working from home. So I'm glad to see that people are doing that. If they are working from home, that means they're going to be more focused and more productive, which is good. There are some people saying, though, some people just aren't suited to it. They get bored or they get distracted. Maybe they've got kids at home. So it really depends on the person. So I think that's good for especially the C-suite to know If you're managing somebody who's working from home, you have to be conscious of the situation they're in and try to work around that as much as possible. Otherwise, you're going to end up with somebody who's stressed and not performing as well.
Yeah, we're not asking this full question, but I think in the study that you're going to be talking about, email is up, email is arriving 24/7, but it's got to be tough, especially if your kids. All of a sudden now you're the homeschooler, you're making sure the kids are at the computer.
Yeah.
And you're trying to work from home, and maybe you have two spouses working at home. I know that's your situation. So we have to adapt. Hey, but what percentage of your time are you working from home? Just curious.
I'm actually curious about this one too, Bob, because I haven't really heard.
Wow. Look at that.
It seems like there's still a significant amount. I know my dad's in the industry as well, and his work is saying probably late next summer. And I've heard some that there's about 60% of workers total, not just in this industry, that are going to be working from home permanently now. So it's definitely an interesting and changing situation.
Yeah. The ramifications are huge in terms of how that affects the commercial real estate. I know John Riosti, who we're going to have on Thursday from with American Banker, they're redoing the whole thing. And I'm sure the reason why we're addressing this is everyone is how do we still process, how do we still operate in a changing world? And finally, this is Katie's question. Do you have a dedicated office? Why are you asking this question, Katie?
So the Harvard study that I'm basing my article on tomorrow was looking at productivity, and one of the things they distinctly noticed is people who live in larger homes were doing better and seemed happier. And when they started looking at it, they noticed the pattern really wasn't the larger homes, it was whether or not they had a dedicated office space in their home somewhere where they can get away and focus on work. That is a significant factor in productivity.
Well, very good. Well, thank you. 2/3 of you said yes to that. Thank you for that, Katie. I look forward to the report. Hey, let's talk about Washington very quickly. Nothing much, but the Speaker of the House and the Secretary Treasurer are talking. At least we're having a talk. What's going on with that?
Right. So they are talking, and they've been talking for a little while, trying to find some kind of negotiation for a larger stimulus package. What they really want to do, and what Pelosi's pushing for, is at least $2.2 trillion. So they are trying to work towards something that they can agree on. What they've done so far is they've kind of edited the HEROES Act, which passed in May, and they've changed some of that to be more relevant to today, because there are some things that have already passed that made it irrelevant. What the new version of it does is it, of course, reopens the Paycheck Protection Program, offers some set-asides for struggling small businesses and underserved communities. It also adds new funding for the IDL grants, which I know a lot of people were discussing last week. And yeah, it's just mostly what we've been talking about. It offers, of course, some other things for other industries as well, such as the stimulus checks and things like that again. But it's really, these things have been discussed in almost every version of every bill I've seen. So they're definitely bipartisan support for these kinds of things.
I was going to say, anything there that the administration or the Republicans in Congress are balking at?
I haven't heard anything with this particular portion of it.
Right.
It seems like they have a lot of bipartisan support for this particular portion. It's more the things like the stimulus checks and some of the other places the funding is going toward that I think they're kind of disagreeing about right now, trying to figure out where they want the additional funding to go toward, healthcare or education and things like that, where there's more of a disagreement.
Real quick, SBA extended their guidance on acceptable e-signatures. It was due to expire September 30th. They're now extending those signatures to November 30th. The DocuSign is valid. You don't need to do anything. If it's a fax, you do have to get a wet signature, but you don't have to get it immediately. We have a couple questions. Blake says, on top of the forgiveness apps, I just noticed the forgiveness apps are only good until October 31st. obviously that will change. Jerome says we've submitted almost 200 forgiveness apps, the oldest being 32 days, and it hasn't moved. We're still pending validation. Jerome, we did a question on that yesterday. No one has received funding, so you're not alone. They're not picking on you, so don't worry about that. And finally, let's see, please take advantage of our compensation plan, both for the data is now ready. If you're in one of those buckets, feel free to order it. You can contact Joseph at colemanreport.com or give us a call. We'll be happy to take care of that. And finally, Lance is doing this webinar on the new SOP on Thursday, and we're going to do a webinar on BDO next week. I ran through that because, you know, I sort of like to stop on time. Katie, I look forward to your report, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. And thank you for joining us for Coleman Report Live and for supporting America's Main Street, one entrepreneur at a time.
Have a great day.